We are live, sir.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the National Security Conversations. This afternoon, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, met the leaders of Jammu and Kashmir's political parties. The meeting ended an hour ago, and while we still do not know what exactly transpired in the meeting, reports indicate that the Indian government might undo one of the three decisions it made on Jammu and Kashmir in August 2019, that is, the reinstating of Jammu and Kashmir's statehood. This was the first political outreach from New Delhi to Jammu and Kashmir ever since the BJP government in India in August 2019 decided to, one, divide the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two parts, two, downgrade these divided parts, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, into two union territories, and three, de-operationalized Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which provided a special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. To that extent, the meeting today was an important one. So is it the beginning of a new political process in Jammu and Kashmir and the beginning of a new dialogue between New Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir? Coming in the wake of back-channel talks with Pakistan and the ceasefire on the line of control in February this year, this move by New Delhi gains even more importance. So what are the political and strategic implications of this crucial meeting that took place today at the Prime Minister's office in Delhi? To discuss this important development, I have with me Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, the former Northern Army commander and the co-founder of the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, New Delhi. I'm also joined by Mr. Siddharth Varadarajan, the founding editor of the Wire.in. General Hooda, let me start with you. How do you view these developments? What are the political implications of this outreach by New Delhi to Jammu and Kashmir's political parties and leaders?
So thank you, Happymon, for inviting me to this discussion. I think it's a very important step, as you said. I think it's also a very, very positive step that has taken place because it comes almost after 2 years of, complete lack of any kind of political activity, a lack of outreach to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. First thing, I think the impact is going to be on the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and particularly people of the Kashmir Valley, who felt at that time that there's a huge sense of betrayal that has happened. They were in a kind of a shock. Not so much, I think, on the fact that the constitutional status had been taken away, but the fact that the state had been downgraded into a union territory. So I think it will bring in a level of hope among the people that yes, the political process has started. They can be sort of in charge of their own destiny in the sense of choosing their political leaders and seeing how we can move forward to resolve this conflict. I think it's also a political understanding in Delhi that the local regional parties have an important role to play. I mean, there was an attempt, there is talk that there was an attempt to, try and bring in alternative political leadership. But what we saw after the DDC elections was that the regional parties have an important role to play in resolution of the problem of Kashmir. And so I think in inviting those leaders, and I'm glad all the leaders actually accepted the invitation, which again is a sort of a positive development. If we had had major political parties from Kashmir boycotting, this meeting, I think it would have been a backward kind of step. So I see it as a positive political step. Ultimately, whatever successes you might have in the security realm, the problem to a large extent has a political dimension and needs to be tackled in that way. So I look at it as a very positive step.
Right. General Hooda, let me sort of ask you a slightly different question from a security angle. How do you sort of assess the security situation in Jammu and Kashmir today? I mean, before the ceasefire, February ceasefire, and after the ceasefire, and how do you think this decision of politically engaging the leaders of Jammu and Kashmir would impact the security situation there? I mean, keeping in mind the fact that this group only involved mainstream political leaders and not the dissident political leaders. So, that's a nuanced point right there. So how do you sort of assess the security situation, and how this decision is perhaps going to impact on that security situation?
So as far as the security situation is concerned, there was a feeling, Dr. Jacob, after the 5th August decision, that you could see, eruption of violence, particularly street protests, not so much, in terms of terrorist violence, but people coming out on the streets and protesting that decision. That has not happened. The security situation has remained under control. And again, when I'm talking about the security situation, uh, the number of terrorists are a few hundred. So really, they can't change the security paradigm. But you don't want a repeat of what happened in 2008, 9, 10, 2016, the kind of street level violence that took place. Fortunately, that has remained under control. Also, looking at what is happening between India and Pakistan, the fact that you now have a ceasefire agreement since February, the ceasefire agreement is held. And the army, by its own admission, has said that they haven't seen infiltration that is coming across from Pakistan, which means probably there is some check from the Pakistan side, even on the infiltration. And if infiltration doesn't happen, that again automatically sort of reduces violence levels, within Jammu and Kashmir. So I see if relations improve with Pakistan in whatever small way it does, in terms of confidence building measures like the ceasefire agreement. There is a political outreach. It is going to have a direct impact on the security situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and a positive sort of step.
Interesting. General Hooda, how do you sort of look at the geopolitics of it? I mean, there is this theory that the August 2019 decision somehow brought China and Pakistan strategically closer than ever on the Jammu and Kashmir issue. Now we know what happened in 2020. There was a standoff, and you commanded forces in the northern sector on the LOC and the manufacturing control. So, from a strategic point of view, was it playing on New Delhi's mind that you have a coming together of the strategic interests of China and Pakistan? Therefore, it is important to let some steam off, from the Western front. Do you think that played a role in New Delhi's calculation as far as this political outreach is concerned?
Certainly, certainly. I mean, the decision has an external dimension, I think, and we cannot get away from it. The fact that, as you alluded to, we saw coming together of China and Pakistan on the Kashmir issue. In fact, China raising this issue in international forums, and therefore, and with the situation that is happening on the LAC, I mean, easing off of pressure on one front, as has happened with the ceasefire agreement, I think makes strategic sense as far as India is concerned. There was also, beyond India, China, Pakistan triangle, I think there was also an international dimension. There was a fair amount of criticism of how the government has handled the situation in Kashmir. Not so much on the constitutional sort of decisions, but on the way that Kashmir was handled, the fact that it was broken up, the fact that prisoners were there, internet was shut down, etc. And constantly India's sort of human rights record was coming under scrutiny. So I think the step will also ease off some of that international pressure. So I would say Happymon it's like a win-win situation, both domestically and internationally. It makes a lot of sense.
Siddharth, is there a climb down by New Delhi here? Is New Delhi walking back from a very extreme position that it took in 2019? Look at it this way. I mean, at least that's my reading of it. New Delhi really has lost nothing by reaching out to Kashmir at this point of time. Both the Prime Minister and the Home Minister had said many times in the past that they would return statehood to Jammu and Kashmir, and so that is really not a climb down, as it were. But what is your take on that? Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think this is a climb down?
Well, first of all, the fact is, I mean, if the main news point to come out of today's meeting is that we want to have early elections and delimitation, and that we are looking for restoration of statehood at the appropriate time, well, there's nothing great or new in this, because This is the formal, official, stated position of the government of India for the past 2 years. Amit Shah said on the floor of the House that we are committed to restoration of Jammu and Kashmir statehood. So I think this is a red herring. The fact is that on August the 5th, 2019, the Modi government decided that it was going to act as if nothing from the past that was important to the statecraft of India mattered anymore. So the political parties that took part in elections and the leaders who were allied to what is called unionist politics, if you like, PDP, National Conference, parties that the BJP had itself allied with. Mr. Modi decided that these people are no longer relevant. These leaders are irrelevant. The constitutional promises and guarantees made to the people of Jammu and Kashmir are not relevant. And that we are going to proceed with a clean slate and chart a new course. So this was the conceit which drove Narendra Modi and Amit Shah to undertake the series of steps that they took beginning on August the 5th, 2019. Now the reality, and which is why your question of a walk back is relevant, the reality is that this ideologically driven project, which had no grounding in reality, it had no grounding in statecraft, it had no grounding in geopolitics or diplomacy. It was driven by, essentially a prejudice or an ideological mindset, has proven itself to be a failure for the last 2 years. We can see that attempts to create a new cadre of leaders or a new grammar of politics in the valley has failed. Yes, you could say that National Conference and PDP don't enjoy popular support, but at the height of the Nehruvian era or the pre-370 abolition era, it's not as if these leaders were universally accepted. There was a large section of the population that boycotted elections. And it's not as if there's been any substantial change in the importance or relevance of those leaders. You have even on the law and order front, it's not as if you've been able to deal with the threat of terror any better than you were equipped to do earlier. And you have opened up an international can of worms, which the Indian state is unfortunately having to pay for in the form of a joint military threat from China and Pakistan, and of course renewed international interest and a renewed set of statements, the most recent of which was made by the US Acting Assistant Secretary of State in the congressional hearing, where they basically expressed displeasure, maybe not in very strident or harsh language, but they were critical of what the government of India was doing in Jammu and Kashmir, which was not something that used to happen 10, 15, 20 years ago. You have to go back to maybe the early 90s to find a replay of that kind of thing. So there is pressure to hold elections. It wants to, and earlier it was thinking that the DDC elections and the role of the King's Party, Altaf Bukhari's Apni Party will somehow make the other parties irrelevant and chart a course, but that didn't work. You have people in Jammu saying that we want statehood. You have people in Ladakh saying we want restoration of an assembly. So any which way you turn, there are no investments happening in J&K. There is no return of Kashmiri Pandits happening. So none of the stated promises and the premises on the basis of which Modi acted have been borne out by events on the ground. So of course, he's floundering, and this is a walk back.
Right. Okay. Now let's put it this way. This is clearly not a progressive political step, as you're pointing out. But I mean, the way I see it, this is also the Modi government speaking from a position of strength in many ways. I mean, the Jammu and Kashmir political leaders have to come to Delhi, meet the government, even though they know Article 370 is never going to be returned. And the BJP has managed to sort of rewrite the rules of politics in Jammu and Kashmir the way it looks like. They haven't involved the dissidents in these negotiations at all. So to my mind, even though there has been some international pressure, and as General Hooda pointed out, there is the China angle and also perhaps the Afghan angle, you're probably looking at BJP coming out quite strongly from from this kind of situation. Don't you think so?
I don't think so. I think that, of course, Modi's ability to summon these leaders to Delhi, despite not having any pre-announced agenda, and it's quite funny because what I gather happened in the meeting is that some of the leaders, when they were asked to speak, when the meeting began, said, "Look, you've called us. What's the agenda? Why don't you tell us why you've called us?" And you had the MOS, Jitendra Singh, saying, "No, aap bataiye, what's on your mind, etc., etc." And then anyway, people spoke. Now, the fact of the matter is that the government has that ability, but from the point of view of the political parties which came, I think they did the right thing. I don't think anybody should refuse to engage. I don't think whether it's India, Pakistan, or India, China, or anybody who has a grievance against the union government, in any situation when you have differences of opinion or conflict, I think it's always wise to seize every opportunity you can have for discussion and dialogue, even if you know that the chances of an outcome that are going to be mutually acceptable are pretty slim. Now, these parties knew going into this meeting that on the fundamental issues of the restoration of constitutional autonomy, for which, of course, the matter is pending in the Supreme Court, Modi and Shah were highly unlikely to be at all accommodating. But I think they did the right thing in going there and saying, "Look, this is important for us," and you can't have a slogan of "Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas" and treat the people of Jammu and Kashmir as literally second-class citizens who have inferior access to the internet, who are harassed by the security forces and different agencies for exercising free speech in the way that Indians across India exercise, and that this is not acceptable. And I think it's important that they came to this meeting and said, made their point of view in one way or the other. And the government, there's now a record of them having presented their point of view, right? So yeah, the government will try to make the best of this. They will seek to present it as a kind of propaganda coup that we got them to come. But the fact is that they also have to answer that you said, Mr. Shah said, that these are the Gupkar gang. These are irrelevant politicians. Well, if they are so irrelevant, why did you feel the need to invite them and host a 3.5-hour meeting with the Prime Minister? Surely this is an adverse comment on your own ability to do things the way that you had promised. So I think that, how this plays out, I think, the aim was for international optics, and how this plays out, we'll have to see. But I don't think one can say unequivocally that this round has gone to Modi and Shah or to the union government. I think that this we have to see what follows next, and when elections are held, what comes out of those elections. I mean, there is a dynamic process. The ball is in play, and there's no telling what will happen.
Right. General Hooda, how do you think Pakistan will sort of view this development? Are they likely to view this as a half measure? Given the fact that the Pakistanis have consistently argued, at least if not in the recent past, for some time in the wake of the 2019 decisions, that unless and until India withdraws the steps that it took in Jammu and Kashmir in August 2019, they were not going to get into a conversation with India on any topic. But now, given the fact that we have a ceasefire agreement, given the fact that there were some back-channel negotiations, how do you think Pakistan is going to respond to this particular step that India has taken vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir?
So as far as Pakistan is concerned, I don't think there was, complete consensus on what to do and what actions, what strategy should they follow. Because, you heard at least General Bajwa saying, reading down of Article 370 is not a major issue as far as we are concerned. On the political leadership, you had the foreign minister at one time saying Article 370 is an internal matter. And then, of course, he had to backtrack after a lot of criticism. Even Imran Khan has been sort of, making different statements. I think the key issue will be whether Pakistan wants to take things forward with India. If they do, they can use this, as a step to say, look, India has started some process in Kashmir that we wanted. Yes, Article 370 hasn't been rolled back, but they are giving statehood. Their demands of protecting, not having sort of massive migration into the state to change the demographic pattern, etc., etc. So I think it'll all depend on the larger view that Pakistan takes to improve relations with India. So they could use that and use this meeting that has taken place between the Prime Minister and political leaders to say, look. Some of our demands have been met. Imran Khan could say, as he has said, that there is a roadmap towards sort of progress. So how they view it is, as I said, in the larger context of, do they wish to sort of move ahead in improving relations with India or not? So they could take it either way.
Right. Siddharth, if you look at the last 8 months, you had a back channel going on between India and Pakistan. You had the ceasefire agreement in February this year, and now you have this, outreach to Kashmir and potentially the reinstating of statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. Do you see this as, incremental steps in a well-orchestrated process to building peace with Pakistan and with Kashmiris? Or do you see these as one-off tactical measures by New Delhi, which they sort of take out from the kitty of tricks, as it were? How do you sort of view this?
Look, I think we need to be absolutely crystal clear here that on August the 5th, 2019, the government of India, of course, took momentous decisions vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir. Equally, it was sending a clear message to Pakistan that there will be no future engagement with you on J&K. The truth is that even prior to this, the Modi government had shown an unwillingness to engage with Pakistan on the Kashmir issue, although this was still couched in terms of that phrase that talks and terror can't progress together, right? But we are today in a situation, and I think we need to be crystal clear here. And I think if we have, if Pakistani analysts understand this, it's important. Tomorrow, even if terror were to stop, I don't think the Modi government is prepared to engage in a dialogue on the subject matter of Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan anymore. This is a reality, which Pakistan also has to deal with. For them,
why do you say so? Why do you say so? I mean,
because I'll tell you why I say so. Because the entire design and logic of the move taken on August the 5th, 2019, is to, in their definition, in the BJP's definition, or Modi and Shah's definition, that this is completing the process of integration of J&K with India. Failure to have done that in a timely fashion is what created the problem of J&K vis-a-vis Pakistan. And that the only unfinished business, if at all, is, as Jaishankar said, and as Amit Shah has said, when Pakistan is going to return POK to India. So there can be, so I would be extremely skeptical. I know that Dawn has reported things. I would be extremely skeptical if the current regime in India has taken steps or given any kind of assurances to Pakistan, whether on the restoration of internet or statehood or anything of that kind. I don't think that, other than the LOC ceasefire, which is a security issue and a question of safety for citizens on both sides. But that's not linked organically in the eyes of the BJP to what the Pakistanis call the masla of Jammu and Kashmir. Mm-hmm. They see this as a security issue, and they can discuss that. But I don't see any, for example, in track 2, we've seen the Musharraf-Manmohan formula. All of that is dead in the water as far as the current establishment in India is concerned. And it is intrinsically linked to what the steps they have taken vis-a-vis J&K, as far as the abolition of 370 and 35 are concerned. So, how Pakistan deals with this, and they are also, there is a contradiction in their position, because they have never accepted Jammu and Kashmir's integration with India, of which 370 was a symbol. So if you never accepted the validity or the importance of 370, well, why shed tears over it? And, you and I have taken part in the same track 2 meetings where we have put this question to our Pakistani friends and not got a satisfactory answer. So if Pakistan may still want to be concerned, or Pakistani analysts and others may want to be concerned about what's happening in J&K, but if you look at it from a legal constitutional point of view, they never considered 370 important. They never considered Farooq Abdullah or Mehbooba as anybody who was legitimate.
That's right. That's right.
I think, So I think that this is and today we are in a way at an impasse for that reason. I don't see much prospect of any ice melting on the Kashmir question as far as India-Pakistan is concerned.
General Hooda, what Siddharth is saying in many ways is that, be it the back channel, be it the CFA, or be it the outreach to Kashmir at this point of time, we should not sort of view that as part of a master plan in Delhi to create peace and stability in Kashmir or vis-a-vis Pakistan. Let me sort of put that. Let me put a slightly controversial question. I mean, there has been some criticism of Mehbooba Mufti for saying that Pakistan is a stakeholder. It is important also to reach out to Pakistan on the Kashmir question, etc. Where do you stand on that? I mean, not from a moral point of view, but from a realpolitik point of view. Is Pakistan a stakeholder in Kashmir? Is it important for India to talk to Pakistanis on the Kashmir question for its own sake? Purely from a realpolitik perspective.
So, I completely agree with Siddharth as far as J&K, internal constitutional issues are concerned. I think India has made it very clear that Pakistan has no say as far as this is concerned. India has said that Kashmir is a bilateral issue and we are able to discuss it. So you can discuss issues about LOC, about cross-LOC movements, etc., what to do with the borders, etc. But as far as the internal affairs of Jammu and Kashmir are concerned, Pakistan has no locus standi to even comment on those issues. Just as we do not comment largely on internal politics of Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So I think trying to say, and what Mehbooba Mufti has been saying, that Pakistan is a stakeholder. It's a stakeholder in the sense that we have a divided state. We have a line of control. And therefore, yes, a part of it is with Pakistan, part is with India. And therefore, Pakistan is a stakeholder. Doesn't have a stakeholder or a say in what is internally happening, what the political, issues are, what the constitutional issues are. I mean, that's my stance. And I think that, as Siddharth said, India has made it very clear to Pakistan that you don't have a stake in this.
Siddharth, how do you see that Mehbooba's statement and what General Hooda just said, that Pakistan really has no stakes in Jammu and Kashmir? And I emphasize, this is not from a moral point of view, but from a realpolitik point of view. Where does Pakistan stand vis-a-vis Kashmir in the Indian?
Yeah, no, I think the phrase Pakistan is a stakeholder is not an inaccurate one from a realpolitik point of view, nor is it inaccurate even from a normative or humanitarian point of view, because the fact of the matter is that Pakistan's policies, or Pakistan has the capacity and has demonstrated the capacity to inflict enormous damage and pain on Kashmir and on India through the Kashmir problem. So to deny that in this effort to bring peace, to deny that Pakistan has to be involved would be really quite foolish. And I think that, this is the sense in which Mehbooba Mufti probably meant it. I think she would agree with General Hooda, as I do, that when one speaks of stakeholder, one is certainly not referring to Pakistan having a locus vis-a-vis whatever internal arrangements India has. But having said that, I think the reason why sections of the media are making so much of noise about Mehbooba's statement is because they want to cover up the fact that the primary stakeholder today is voiceless. The primary stakeholder has been disenfranchised. The primary stakeholder gets summoned to the thana when she likes a tweet. The primary stakeholder has to, if she's applying for a government job, has to give her social media account details going back to the last 10 years. In other words, the ordinary Kashmiri, who is the most important stakeholder, is today absent from discussion. And the media, the big media in India doesn't want to talk about this, certainly not the channels that are all upset over what Mehbooba said vis-a-vis Pakistan. And I think what I'm saying, Mehbooba and every Kashmiri leader who attended the meeting today would agree with what I'm saying. That the reason they went to this meeting was to emphasize the fact that you cannot have a solution if you're going to treat people who you say are an integral part of India in this fashion. It's simply not acceptable. The constitutional rights that somebody in Tamil Nadu or Kerala enjoys cannot be denied to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and you're denying them that. Quite apart from the fact that elections are not being held, quite apart from the fact that you've robbed them of statehood. But I'm just going into the question of individual liberties, fundamental rights,
right.
Which is the bedrock of our constitution, right? So coming, and just a final point on the Pakistan thing, I think that, I would fully expect that, India and Pakistan would find some way to keep the peace, would find some way to recognize the status quo, just as, you have rhetoric in India, but I don't think anybody in government seriously contemplates that they would be in a position to wrest control of Pak-occupied Kashmir. So there is a rhetorical position, and then there is a realistic position, and this is the area in which you conduct your business. And I think the Pakistani side also needs to recognize and understand that you have your rhetorical position. Don't let it become an impediment to engagement. Don't let it become an impediment to finding ways to improve people's lives. You have traveled on both sides of the LOC. You've written extensively. I mean, there are enormous challenges that could be resolved if the two sides were to talk and simply implement agreements that were settled, that were reached in the past. And that can be done without prejudice to settled or stated positions. And that's the way that, sensible countries solve their problems. But if you remain locked into that kind of sloganeering and always with one eye to your domestic constituents, and I'm afraid Pakistan today is in a bad situation, the kind of hybrid regime you have there. I think General Hooda is right about the emphasis on the Afghanistan front, because what's happening there, I don't think is going to positively influence the Pakistani establishment vis-a-vis Kashmir. I think it may actually embolden them
that's an interesting point. General Hooda, let me... Go, Siddharth, please come in.
I think they may feel they have more cards now because their importance vis-a-vis Afghanistan has risen.
Right, General Hooda, is that how you see it? I mean, in the wake of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, I would imagine that both India and Pakistan realize today that they need to sort of have certain calm in Kashmir, simply because Pakistan needs to consolidate its assets in Afghanistan and sort of, try and sort of see how it manages the emerging Afghan situation. And India certainly is concerned about the return of the Taliban to Kabul. So India needs to sort of have certain stability in Kashmir. And since Pakistan is busy with consolidating Afghanistan, it wants a certain amount of stability in Kashmir. Is that a motivation that drives the Pakistani thinking at this point of time, or do you think that they think they are probably more triumphalistic today, given the fact that, hey, our boys have won over, won against the Americans in Afghanistan, therefore we can sort of flex our muscles a little more regionally?
So if you actually look at some of the writings of Pakistanis over the past 1 or 2 years, you will find, this sense of we are winning in Afghanistan. Not only in Afghanistan, the fact that we have resisted American pressure, despite the fact that the Americans, stopped arms sale, stopped military aid to Pakistan, the fact that they were able to diversify their arms purchases from China, from Turkey, indeed some little bit even from Russia, the fact that they resisted American pressure on Taliban, the Americans needed them for an agreement. So if you see some of their writings, there is this sense that at the end of the day, despite all the pressure that we were under, we have emerged as sort of winners in Afghanistan. Now, there is a danger there because they see Indian presence in Afghanistan as something that's not desirable. And so not so much in Kashmir, but will this have an impact actually on the situation in Afghanistan, that you find the India-Pakistan proxy war sort of playing out in Afghanistan? And that could really muddle things as far as any move forward on bilateral relations between India and Pakistan is concerned. The other view, as you're saying, is look, the situation is very uncertain, and therefore it's better that we all sit down and mutually sort of have a period of calm so that we can deal with the regional situation. I would go with the former, that there is a sense of we have triumphed as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and that, as I said, could be dangerous.
Right, Siddharth, I mean, here's my last question to you, and that is about the sort of strategic convergence between China and Pakistan on the Kashmir question in the wake of the 2019 decision. Do you think that has weighed heavily on the Indian mind, and hence has given rise to a desire to at least release pressure on one front, which is the Western front? Do you see it that way?
If in the context of today's meeting, I would say that the primary source of external pressure is probably the United States. But having said that, that doesn't mean that the China factor has not loomed large in the calculus of both India and the Biden administration. But primarily, I think that the US has been quite insistent, and this goes back to even the Trump administration, by the way, right? The responses of the State Department under Donald Trump have not exactly been helpful to what Modi was doing. They were quite critical, and the Biden administration has kept up that rhetoric in a way. Of course, the situation is eased. You don't have political prisoners in quite the same number as you did earlier, but they want this front to be. They want this to be normalized. Why is the US insisting on that? Perhaps because they think that any step towards quote unquote normalization will ease things on the India-Pakistan front. And the US, in the context of its withdrawal from Afghanistan, would like India and Pakistan to not be at loggerheads and certainly not be daggers drawn. Whether the normalization that Modi and Shah contemplate will be enough to stay Pakistan's hand is hard to say. But I think what the Biden administration and even the Indian side is not counting on is, at the end of the day, for any approach to be durable, you have to carry with you the confidence of the people of Kashmir. And today, the people of Kashmir, I don't think they had very high expectations of the meeting. Looking at what's come out of the meeting, I don't think that, as far as they're concerned, they feel that their marginalization is coming to an end anytime soon. And I think that this, unless New Delhi finds a way to deal with the resentment that people have at being treated in this fashion, I think that J&K will always, create problems for the Union of India, of course, but will also be a factor for instability in the wider region. Right. And, I would fully expect China to take advantage of this, obviously, because, they have their own dynamics and their own, concerns operating. And for them, this is, why would they look a gift horse in the mouth? If India is creating a situation which they can take advantage of, they will do that. And so will the Pakistani generals.
Right. I think all said and done, let's hope this is the beginning of a wonderful peace process between the Kashmiris and the Indian state, and also perhaps between India and Pakistan. General Hooda, Siddharth Varadarajan, thank you so much for your insights, and thank you so much for watching the National Security Conference.